Think we're on. Um, this is Wednesday, December 13th, 2023. That's still mind-blowing to me, how we can be so nearly through this year of 2023. It just doesn't seem possible. I sound like an old man, don't I? I wonder why. By the way, I know I'd gotten a comment a while back about somebody had suggested I needed to oil my chair. I did. I don't know if it helped. But anyway, I did. Just a couple things I want to mention as we are coming up on Christmas time. One is, of course, we're still in our season of prayer and giving for the Lottie Moon. Hi, Jerry and Vicky. The Lottie Moon Christmas offering and prayer for that. So I want to encourage you to be praying about what God wants you to do. And also the ladies are putting together a subscription bake sale kind of thing. So if you want a particular baked good, you might talk to Vicky or Mildred on Sunday. It might be too late already. In fact, if it is, I may hear in just a minute. But then that'll be delivered on, well, you'll pick it up here on Saturday, the 23rd, Christmas Eve. And then also, Christmas Eve, on that Sunday evening, we will have our regular Christmas Eve candlelight service. Starts at 5:30, so I'll invite you to be here for that. We'll just have a time of singing some Christmas carols, reading some scripture, and then also observe the Lord's Supper, and that'll pretty much be it, I guess, except for then recess with our candles. On the prayer list, I do want to encourage you, if you have some updates or names to add. One thing, continue to be in prayer for Miss Betty. She's at home, but she's had some pretty rough times. And then another name to add that's not on the prayer list is a young lady named Morgan. She is Miss Beverly's grandson's wife, and she's 32 weeks pregnant and is having real high blood pressure. So be in prayer for her. And I'm assuming that's it. That's here. If not, somebody correct me. All right. The others on the prayer list continue to remember Ember, a little 13-month-old, one of the twins. She's still in ICU and she is not doing well. Okay, so an update is that Sunday will be the last day to order your baked goods for the 23rd. And then, hello, Larry. Another prayer concern, I guess, is there's a family that's recently moved to Jones Creek. The man's name is Jerry, and he's looking for a job. And I'm thinking he had a pretty good solid lead on one today, and I haven't heard how that has turned out. Hang on. The chair might not be squeaking as much, but it's still sinking. So I had to raise that up so I wouldn't bang my chin on the desk. Oh, okay. They're taking Betty to the hospital in Houston. Okay. And Morgan is getting to go home. Man, I love these instant updates. This is great. But continue to pray for both Betty and for Morgan, and for the baby that Morgan will be having soon. And then, as far as I know, Juan, who's been in the hospital for quite a while, is still not doing well. I'm looking over this list and nothing else is jumping out at me right now. Okay. Not only do I love it when I'm getting the instant updates, I'm loving it when the chat portion of the software is actually working right. So tonight we are going to continue looking at the Ten Commandments, starting with number 2. And I'm going to go ahead and read those first verses that include all 10 commandments, but we're not going to look at all 10 of them tonight. Then God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of... Did I say chapter 20 of Exodus? I don't remember. Sorry. Chapter 20, Exodus, beginning verse 1. Then God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the place of slavery. Do not have other gods besides me. Do not make an idol for yourself, whether in the shape of anything in the heavens above, or on the earth below, or in the waters under the earth. Do not bow and worship to them, and do not serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, bringing the consequences of your father's iniquity on the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing faithful love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commands. Do not misuse the name of the Lord your God, because the Lord will not leave anyone unpunished who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. You are to labor 6 days and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You must not do any work, you, your son or daughter, your male or female servant, your livestock, or the resident alien who is within your city gates. For the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and everything in them in 6 days. Then he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and declared it holy. Honor your father and mother, so that you may have a long life in the land that your Lord your God is giving you. Do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not give false testimony against your neighbor, do not covet your neighbor's house, do not covet your neighbor's wife, his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. So as we look at this second commandment, it says the Hebrews were to not make an idol for themselves. And at times it seems the Hebrews took this to mean they were to not make any representation of anything. But the word for idol it comes from a word that means to carving out of wood or of stone, an object to be worshipped. An idol was something to be worshipped. Now, I gotta tell you, for just half a minute there, I do struggle with the popular TV show that was on for a number of years, and it went off, and now it's back on, and Well, maybe it's off by now again. I don't know. American Idol. Um, doesn't that kind of bother you a little bit? Because the name idol means something to be worshipped. Anyway, moving on. And sometimes they are worshipped as well, which is inappropriate. But this commandment is not about making any representation at all, but anything to represent a God or the one true God in order to worship it. They'd already been commanded not to worship any other gods, so this may be partly related to that, but also it's an admonition not to make anything to represent him, because the worship of God was to be spiritual, and God is spirit, and not to be material worship or to be worshipped as an object. One thing that seems to happen is that when people make something that is to represent God, this is just going to remind me to worship God, so we'll pretend I've got a little picture. I know we've all seen pictures of what some people thought Jesus might have looked like, and there, in fact, there's a painting of the door where Jesus knocked on the door. So just pretend I had that hanging in my office, and let's just remind me to worship Jesus. Well, over time, for a lot of people, that picture is no longer something to remind me to worship Jesus, but it becomes Jesus. It becomes the object I worship, and that's making an idol. And maybe that's why, at least part of the reason why God forbids images, because we forget they're just a picture or a statue, and we think it now is the God we worship. God is a jealous God. He will not allow anything to take his glory. It's also, as I mentioned, remember that God is spirit and can't be represented by any object. And a while ago when I was talking about sometimes the Hebrews thought that was a ban on making anything that would represent anything, any kind of a representation of anything. Well, that's not likely, since in the instructions for making the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant and Holy of Holies in particular, where the angels were there with their wings touching. So that's God gave that instruction. Later on, not later on, again, relating to the idea that they thought that maybe was a forbidding any kind of image at all being made. Recall that even in the wilderness, God, once the people were, for their complaining and so forth, they were bitten by venomous serpents, and then God had Moses make a bronze serpent for the people to look at, and so there's that again. It's interesting also to notice that anything that were outlawed as objects of worship basically came from every sphere of man's knowledge, from the heavens above, include the skies, or the earth, anything on it, and the waters, to cover the whole universe. Nothing could be made to become an object of worship. And when you think about this, the people are coming out of Egypt where there were multiple gods, many of them represented by animals, or the sun, or the sun god, cats and crocodiles and all kinds of things. So these images were not to be worshipped. It says, you will not cause yourself to bow down to them or worship them. And the idea of causing yourself to bow down kind of relates to the idea of that we don't worship things accidentally. Oh, I really don't know what happened. It was just an accident that I worshiped this image. No, you caused yourself to do it. You did it. It's completely within your power. Again, we say that God is a jealous God, but don't equate that with human jealousy, because oftentimes that human jealousy is selfishness, irrational, and sometimes without any basis in fact whatsoever. But this is God as refusing any of his rightful glory to go to anyone else. And that every time I think about this, I'm reminded about a time I was at the prison, and there was a song that was being played, and a young man was doing a mime to that. You remember several years ago we had a mime team here with the young people, and how that brought it's just a pretty neat thing it brought into our worship. But in this particular thing, the young man was miming to a song, and some of the words of the song said, "I need your glory." That's a little bit non-biblical. God is not allowing his glory to go to another. So God refuses to allow any of his glory to go to anything else, anyone else. And there are consequences for the failure to worship God alone. And those that are guilty of the iniquity of worshiping idols will have the consequences visited not just on themselves, but even to the third and fourth generations. This doesn't necessarily mean if your great-grandfather was an idolater that one day out of the blue God will just zap you because great-grandpa was an idolater. And it doesn't mean that you'll be not allowed to go to heaven. What it does mean, though, is that there are some natural consequences to that. They tend to follow anytime someone worships idols. And one of those consequences is that the example of the previous generation tends to carry a lot of weight in the following generations. When father and mother didn't follow God, or they instead followed some other religious system, it's much harder for the next generation to turn to God, because not only is it taking on some other kind of worship than they're used to, but it also puts them at odds with their whole family. So that's some of the stuff that happens. So they're not only are they guilty of worshiping idols themselves, but they're also guilty of influencing their children and grandchildren. But we can't talk about the judgment of God without also talking about the mercy of God, because that passage goes on to talk about verse 6 talks about his judgment upon those who disobey him, and then the contrast with his loving kindness for those who do obey. And it shows faithful love to 1,000 generations of those who love him, he said. So his mercy and love are greater than the condemnation. So that's a pretty good deal too. His love is greater than the consequences of his sin, of our sin. Can't even talk today. The two phrases, those who love me and those who keep my commandments, are not two different qualifications. They're the same things. The ones who love him are the ones who keep his commandments. The ones who keep his commandments are the ones who love him. Please understand, It's a difference in trying to keep his commandments so we'll be okay, as opposed to we love him and we want to keep his commandments. And if we truly love him, we want to keep them. They're tied together. In the New Testament, Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commandments. Then later on, it says, the one who loves me, the one who has my commandments and keeps them, that's who loves me. So that's an important thing. So again, this second commandment is forbidding worship of any object. It also reminds us that we're not to think of God as being like us in our human traits. One of the things that we need to keep in mind is, God created us in his image. And it seems like ever since then, we've been trying to recreate God in our image. And I've heard of, and I've heard some teachings of some well-known, quote, preachers who describe God in human terms. He's just a man, but he's a big man. Wow. Not really, people. He is not a man. Sometimes we think him as maybe a glorified man. In fact, there's a well-known heresy or cult, whichever way you want to go with it, that teaches that God was once a man and he became God, and we can too. That's heresy. It's untrue. It's non-biblical. When we do things like that, we have departed from the worship of the God of the Bible. And we need to understand that there are many expressions in the Bible that talk about his arm is not too short to save, his eye is on the sparrow, for instance, and but that's the only way we can express some truths about God in human terms. But he's not like us. God is spirit. Starting in verse 7, we also see that God condemns the vain use of his name. We're going to talk about the vain use of that name in a minute, but first of all, let's just talk about the name. Names are always important, to us. It's always nice when people get our names right. How many times some of us have been called the wrong name. I wonder how many of us have called one of our children by the name of one of the other children. In fact, I've called my granddaughter by her mother's name a time or two. I've called after I spent a few days with my sister a while back, I called my wife by my sister's name. Did not go well. But names are even more important. Names are even more important to the Hebrews, because names were used to say something about the person. It had to do with the essence of the person or qualities, and to say a person's name was as close as you could get to say that person. Names today don't have really that same power, that same kind of meaning. But for the Hebrews, sometimes the name was descriptive of the person or his background, or aspirational. Statements of faith. Names like Moses or Joshua had name to draw out, and then God is salvation for Joshua. So think about God's name for a minute. It's Yahweh. It means I am. And that name is important. The meaning is important. It tells us something about the bearer of the name. The name I am reminds us that God is eternal. He was, he is, and he ever will be. He is I am. And another thing I want to say about Hebrews, the Jews, and the name of God is that they were very reverent about his name. In fact, they were very careful so careful to avoid using his name inappropriately or in vain that they seldom would use it. In the Hebrew Scriptures, at first there were only the consonants. There were no vowel letters to represent the vowels. Eventually, they came with what we might call vowel pointings that are under the consonants. And if you look in a Hebrew Bible today, I was just looking to see if it's up there. It's up there. You would see these lines and dots under each consonant, and those represent the vowel sounds. But in the Hebrew Scriptures, so cautious were they about writing the name of God, being careful not to misuse it, they didn't put the vowel points under it. They just would put the 4 consonants, which we represent by YH, WH. And the name of God was so revered.